There are rap feuds, and then there are rivalries that seem to survive every era, every album cycle, every business move, and every attempt to finally move on. The latest chapter involving 50 Cent and Rick Ross has taken a familiar rivalry and attached it to a name that makes the conversation much heavier: Tupac Shakur. And before we go any further, there is one important distinction. The public record does not support the wildest version of every rumor circulating online about secret court filings, emergency studio injunctions, threats, or private industry emails. Those details have been repeated as speculation, but they should not be presented as established fact. What is confirmed is already dramatic enough. Rick Ross publicly criticized 50 Cent over his plans involving Eminem and unreleased Tupac vocals, telling him that Tupac should be left to rest. That comment reopened one of hip-hop's most durable rivalries and created a much bigger question. Why does Tupac's name still have the power to turn an old 50 Cent and Rick Ross argument into a completely different conversation? Because this is no longer just about two rappers taking shots at each other. It is about legacy. It is about posthumous music. It is about who gets to decide how an artist's unreleased voice should be used. And underneath all of that, it is about two men who have spent almost 2 decades refusing to let the other one control the narrative. Rick Ross did not simply criticize a song announcement. He questioned the idea of putting a voice that has been silent for decades back into the center of a modern rap release. He also used the moment to attack 50 Cent on another front, bringing up the complicated history surrounding 50's television career and his relationship with Power creator Courtney A. Kemp. Ross argued that 50 should show Kemp the same loyalty he shows Eminem. Then came the line that changed the temperature. Ross addressed the reported Eminem and Tupac collaboration and essentially asked why 50 was bringing Tupac back into the conversation at all. His position was simple. Pac has been gone for decades, so let the man rest. That sounds like a short insult. It is actually a much bigger argument. For years, Tupac's catalog has been treated as more than a collection of recordings. His music is part of a living cultural archive. Every posthumous release raises the same uncomfortable question. When an artist is no longer alive to approve a new performance, remix, feature, or collaboration, where does preservation end and commercial exploitation begin? That debate did not begin with 50 Cent. It has surrounded Tupac's music for years. And there is an especially interesting connection here because Eminem has already been involved in posthumous Tupac material. Eminem produced the 2004 album Loyal to the Game, a project built around Tupac's recordings and reworked after his death. That history makes the current conversation more complicated, because the idea of Eminem working with Tupac's archived vocals is not completely new. What is new is the cultural moment. 50 Cent is not the same artist he was when he first entered the industry. Rick Ross is not the same artist he was when their feud exploded. Eminem is not the same artist he was 20 years ago. And Tupac, ironically, may be the only name in this story whose cultural weight has remained almost completely untouched by time. That is why this controversy has people arguing about much more than a potential song. Let's go back to the beginning, because the history between 50 Cent and Rick Ross explains almost everything about the way they communicate today. Their rivalry became one of the defining rap feuds of the late 2000s. Ross and 50 attacked each other's credibility, careers, identities, business models, and public images. The feud produced diss records, videos, interviews, jokes, personal attacks, and years of online warfare. 50's strategy was especially aggressive. He did not limit himself to music. He turned the conflict into content. He used interviews, social media, videos, comedy, and public humiliation as weapons. Ross answered through records, interviews, and his own version of the boss persona. The important thing is that neither man simply wanted to win a lyrical exchange. They wanted to control the story. That is the key to understanding the current situation. When Ross talks about 50 today, he is not only talking about Curtis Jackson the rapper. He is talking about the businessman, television producer, executive, provocateur, and public figure. When 50 responds to Ross, he rarely treats Ross as only a rapper either. He attacks the entire image surrounding him. That is why even a conversation about Tupac can become ammunition in their old rivalry. Ross's latest comments did exactly that. He questioned the collaboration with Tupac, mocked the idea of 50 working with Eminem and Pac, and then shifted into a broader criticism of 50's career decisions. He also brought Courtney A. Kemp into the discussion, arguing that she deserves recognition for creating power and giving 50 an opportunity in television. That second argument matters because it shows what Ross was really doing. He was not simply saying, "I don't like this Tupac song." He was building a case about loyalty. His argument was essentially that 50 has been willing to stand beside Eminem while, in Ross's telling, failing to give the same loyalty to someone who played a major role in his television success. Whether people agree with that comparison is almost beside the point. It creates a second battlefield. Suddenly, the conversation contains Tupac, Eminem, Courtney Kemp, Power, 50 Cent's television career, G-Unit, and the old Ross versus 50 rivalry. One comment creates 6 different storylines. That is exactly how celebrity controversies become bigger than the original comment. And then there is the question everyone keeps circling back to. What does 50 Cent actually mean when he says he is working with Tupac's unreleased vocals? There is a huge difference between saying a song uses archived vocals and saying that Tupac personally participated in a new recording. Tupac cannot record new music. Any modern collaboration would necessarily be built from material recorded during his lifetime. That distinction matters. It also matters because fans have very different opinions about posthumous music. Some listeners believe that unreleased vocals are a gift to future generations. They want to hear every piece of music that survived in the vault. They see carefully produced posthumous projects as a way to keep an artist's voice alive. Others see it differently. They believe an artist's unfinished recordings should remain private unless there is overwhelming evidence that the artist would have wanted them released. For those fans, a posthumous collaboration can feel less like preservation and more like someone else making artistic decisions on behalf of a person who cannot object. And Tupac is probably one of the hardest artists in history to place inside that debate. His voice is instantly recognizable. His lyrics are deeply connected to his own life, his own era, and his own worldview. When a producer places his vocals over a new beat, the listener is not simply hearing an old recording. They are hearing a conversation between 2 different eras. That is precisely why the idea of Tupac appearing alongside Eminem and 50 Cent creates such a strong reaction. It is not just a collaboration. It is a collision of generations. Tupac represents one era. Eminem represents another. 50 Cent represents another chapter. Put those names together and you automatically create an event, even before anyone hears a single second of the music. And that brings us back to Rick Ross. Ross understands the power of the moment. He knows that saying Tupac's name in a criticism of 50 Cent will generate far more attention than simply saying he dislikes 50's next project. It also gives him a moral argument. If Ross says the issue is respect for Tupac's legacy, then the conversation becomes larger than the 2 men themselves. Fans are forced to choose between 2 positions. One side says, if the estate has authorized the use and the music was handled responsibly, why should anyone object? The other says, authorization is not the same thing as artistic consent. That disagreement is going to exist regardless of what Ross and 50 say next. And there is another uncomfortable question. Who actually owns a dead artist's legacy? The answer is complicated because different pieces of an artist's legacy can be controlled by different people and entities. There can be estates, family representatives, record companies, publishers, producers, rights holders, trusts, and licensing agreements. A vocal recording may have one set of rights attached to it, while the composition has another. So when somebody online says, the estate owns it, that does not automatically answer every legal question. And when somebody says, it's Tupac, so nobody should touch it, that is a cultural position, not necessarily a legal one. The law and the culture do not always speak the same language. That is where this story gets interesting. Ross is making a cultural argument. 50's position, if his announced project moves forward, is likely to be much more practical. If the proper rights have been obtained and the project is legitimate, then the music can be released. Those 2 arguments can exist at the same time, and neither one automatically destroys the other. Now look at the history between these men. In 2009, the feud became intensely personal and public. 50 Cent attacked Ross over his image and background. Ross responded with music and his own attacks. Their exchanges became entertainment events rather than simple rap records. At one point, Ross even released a video built around a mock funeral for 50's career. 50 answered with his own style of psychological warfare. The rivalry was never simply about who had better bars. It was about embarrassment. Who could make the other person look smaller? Who could make the audience laugh at the other person? Who could expose a contradiction? Who could create the headline? And who could make the other man respond? That last question may be the most important one. Because in a long-running celebrity feud, attention itself becomes a currency. Every response gives the other person another opportunity. Every insult creates another headline. Every live stream creates another clip. Every social media post becomes another piece of content for fans, blogs, reaction channels, and commentators. In other words, the feud can survive even when neither side actually needs the feud. It becomes self-sustaining. That is why Ross's Tupac comments matter. They did not create the rivalry. They reactivated it. And this time, the emotional center is different. Instead of simply attacking 50's credibility, Ross is talking about a cultural icon whose death remains one of the defining tragedies in hip-hop history. That gives the argument a seriousness that their old jokes and diss records did not always have. It also creates a dangerous temptation for media outlets. The temptation is to exaggerate. A simple public argument can become industry war. A criticism can become threat. A rumored collaboration can become secret project. A fan theory can become inside information. And once those words start appearing in headlines, the story can move faster than the facts. That is exactly why the biggest thing to understand about this controversy is what we actually know. We know Rick Ross publicly criticized 50 Cent. We know Ross specifically mentioned the reported Eminem and Tupac collaboration. We know Ross argued that Tupac should be left to rest. We know the 50 Cent and Rick Ross rivalry has a long history. We know Tupac has appeared on posthumous releases before. And we know Eminem has previously worked with Tupac's archived recordings. Beyond those points, there are many dramatic claims circulating online that require independent confirmation before anyone should treat them as fact. That includes stories about secret federal filings, emergency insurance actions, physical threats connected to the project, leaked legal agreements, or a coordinated plan to manipulate Ross into triggering a corporate crisis. Those claims make for an explosive story, but explosive does not mean verified. And if this story develops further, that distinction is going to matter. Because if 50 Cent actually releases a new track using Tupac vocals, the conversation will instantly shift. At that point, people will stop debating whether the song exists. They will judge the song itself. Was Tupac's voice used respectfully? Does the production feel natural? Does the collaboration make artistic sense? Does Eminem complement Tupac's original performance? Does 50 contribute something meaningful? Or does the record sound like three famous names were placed together simply because the names guarantee attention? That final question is the one critics will probably ask hardest. Because fame does not automatically create chemistry. A legendary voice plus a legendary rapper plus another legendary rapper does not guarantee a legendary record. Sometimes it creates history. Sometimes it creates a gimmick. And sometimes the answer depends entirely on the production. Think about the technology involved. A posthumous song can be constructed from isolated vocals, alternate takes, unfinished recordings, hooks, verses, ad-libs, and fragments. Producers can change tempo, key, arrangement, instrumentation, and structure around those vocals. That means the modern producer has enormous creative power over how a deceased artist is heard. And with that power comes responsibility. This is why Tupac's name creates a different standard. If an unknown artist's unreleased verse appears on a new song, most listeners might treat it as a cool discovery. If Tupac's unreleased voice appears on a major commercial release decades after his death, people ask whether the song belongs in his legacy. That is a much bigger question, and it explains why Ross's criticism found an audience. He is tapping into a feeling that many fans already have, the feeling that some artists should be protected from endless recycling. But there is another side to the argument. Tupac himself was deeply interested in collaboration, reinvention, confrontation, and artistic experimentation. He worked across styles and surrounded himself with artists from different backgrounds. His catalog contains enough contradictions that it is difficult to predict what he would have approved of decades later. That is the problem with speaking for the dead. Nobody can prove the answer. You can interpret the artist. You can study the artist. You can understand the artist's history, but you cannot ask the artist. That leaves estates, families, rights holders, and collaborators making decisions, and fans judging those decisions. Now bring Eminem into the picture. Eminem's connection to Tupac's posthumous catalog is already established through Loyal to the Game. The project demonstrated exactly how complicated this process can become. Tupac's existing vocals were placed into new musical arrangements created years after his death. Some fans appreciated the project. Others criticized the production choices. That debate has never completely disappeared. So when Ross attacks the idea of another Eminem-related Tupac collaboration, he is stepping into a conversation that already existed. But there is something else worth noticing. Ross is not only criticizing Eminem. He is using Eminem as a symbol of 50 Cent's alliances. Eminem is one of 50's most important professional relationships. Their partnership helped define an entire period of mainstream hip-hop. 50 was signed to Shady/Aftermath, and Eminem was one of the people who helped bring him into that world. So when Ross says, in effect, "Why are you loyal to Eminem but not to Courtney Kemp?" he is attacking 50's idea of loyalty itself. That is strategic. It forces 50 into a choice. If he responds to the Tupac criticism, Ross gets attention. If he responds to the Courtney Kemp criticism, Ross gets another headline. If he ignores both, people can claim he has no answer. That is the architecture of a good public feud. The opponent creates multiple doors. Every door leads back to the same room. And 50 Cent has spent years proving that he understands this game. He knows how to turn a criticism into content. He knows how to make a response become a second story. He knows that silence can be interpreted as weakness, but he also knows that an aggressive response can create even more attention. That is why the next move matters. Will 50 answer Ross directly? Will he ignore him and simply release the music? Will he respond with humor? Will he attack Ross's business? Will he turn the conversation toward the Tupac estate and the authorization question? Or will he do something completely different? There is a reason people are waiting. They know the history. They know 50 rarely lets a public challenge sit untouched forever. But there is also a reason Ross keeps getting attention when he speaks. He understands performance. The larger-than-life sunglasses, the luxury imagery, the boss language, the enormous personality. Ross knows how to create a moment. That means both men are operating in the same economy. Attention. And Tupac is the ultimate attention multiplier. Mention Pac and the audience expands beyond the normal 50 versus Ross crowd. Now you have older hip-hop fans. You have younger listeners discovering Tupac. You have Eminem fans. You have G-Unit fans. You have Ross supporters. You have people who simply want to debate posthumous music. And you have people who do not care about the feud at all, but will click because the headline contains Tupac's name. That is why this controversy can grow quickly. But the bigger story may not actually be the feud. It may be what happens to music catalogs as technology continues to evolve. Posthumous music is not going away. Archives are getting deeper. Old recordings are being restored. And used vocals can be isolated. Producers can build entirely new arrangements around old performances. Artificial intelligence is also changing the conversation. Although AI-generated vocals and authentic archived recordings are not the same thing. The industry is approaching a future where the question will not simply be, can this artist appear on a new song? The question will be, should this artist appear on a new song? And who gets to decide? That is the real debate underneath the Ross and 50 Cent argument. Tupac is simply the name powerful enough to make everyone pay attention. Imagine the precedent. If a major posthumous collaboration becomes a huge hit, labels and estates will see the commercial potential. If fans reject it, the message changes. If a project is praised for artistic integrity, it becomes a model. If it is criticized as exploitation, future estates may become more cautious. One song can therefore influence an entire business. That is why the language around these releases matters. Words like vault, unreleased, legacy, estate, and collaboration sound simple. They are not. Each one carries legal, emotional, and commercial weight. And the word unreleased is especially powerful. An unreleased recording is not necessarily an unfinished recording. Sometimes an artist deliberately chose not to release something. Sometimes the recording was forgotten. Sometimes the quality was poor. Sometimes the artist intended to return to it. Sometimes the recording was simply never selected for an album. Without knowing the original context, it is impossible to know why a particular vocal remained in a vault. That uncertainty is part of the controversy. If Tupac himself rejected a recording, releasing it would feel very different from releasing a performance he had intended for a future project. The public may never know the full answer, and that is where transparency becomes important. If a posthumous project is released, the people behind it can help the audience understand what they are actually hearing. Was the vocal complete? Was it from an alternate take? Was it part of an unfinished song? Was it recorded for a specific project? Who authorized it? Who produced the new music? Those details do not eliminate criticism, but they give fans the information needed to make an informed judgment. Now let's return to Ross. There is a strange irony in his position. Ross is arguing for protecting Tupac's legacy while simultaneously using Tupac's name to attack another rapper. That does not automatically make his argument hypocritical. A person can genuinely believe a cultural figure deserves protection and still use that figure's legacy as part of a public debate. But critics will absolutely point out the contradiction, and 50 Cent is almost certainly aware of it. If he responds, one obvious counterargument is that talking about Tupac does not automatically mean disrespecting Tupac. The strongest defense of the project would be simple. If the recordings were legitimately cleared, if the people responsible for Tupac's estate approved the release, and if the music treats the original performance with respect, then the project is not automatically an insult to his memory. That does not mean everyone has to like it. It means disagreement about artistic taste should not automatically become an accusation of disrespect. That distinction is crucial, because celebrity culture often turns subjective opinions into moral battles. I don't like this becomes this is disrespectful. I wouldn't have released it becomes nobody should release it. That collaboration sounds unnecessary becomes they are exploiting a dead artist. Those are different claims. And the stronger the language becomes, the easier it is for the actual issue to disappear. The actual issue is simple. What is the recording? Who authorized it? How is it being used? And does the final music honor or diminish the artist's legacy? Everything else is noise. Of course, noise is exactly what makes a 50 Cent and Rick Ross story so entertaining. These two have spent years turning noise into spectacle. Their feud has already passed through music, social media, interviews, business criticism, personal attacks, and public trolling. The fact that it can now attach itself to Tupac shows how durable the rivalry has become. But there is another reason this chapter feels different. Both men are now older. They have built businesses. They have careers outside traditional rap. They have become executives and cultural personalities. The old question of who won the beef has become less important than who controls the narrative. That is a much more sophisticated game, and both men understand it. Ross has positioned himself as a symbol of luxury, independence, and larger-than-life success. 50 has positioned himself as an entrepreneur who moves between music, television, film, branding, and online entertainment. When they attack each other now, they are attacking entire brands. That is why a comment about a song can quickly become a comment about television. A comment about television can become a comment about loyalty. A comment about loyalty can become a comment about legacy. And suddenly everyone is talking about Tupac. That is the power of narrative. Now consider the role of fans. Fans are not passive anymore. They clip interviews. They repost Instagram videos. They create reaction videos. They debate in comment sections. They turn one sentence into a 20-minute argument. They choose sides. And then the algorithms reward the argument. The most extreme interpretation often spreads faster than the nuanced one. That is why a responsible breakdown needs to separate what happened from what people think happened. The confirmed comments are already enough to create a story. Ross challenged 50. He invoked Tupac. He questioned the idea of bringing Pac's voice into a new release. He criticized 50's loyalty and television history. That is the event. The rest should remain labeled as rumor, theory, or speculation until evidence appears. And if new evidence does appear, the story can be updated. That is how this should work. Now imagine the day the song actually arrives. The first few seconds will probably be analyzed frame by frame. Fans will listen to Tupac's vocal. They will compare the sound quality to older recordings. They will debate whether the verse feels complete. They will examine Eminem's contribution. They will analyze 50's performance. They will ask whether the beat sounds like something Tupac could have chosen himself. Some will love it instantly. Some will hate it instantly. Some will say the song proves Ross wrong. Others will say the song proves Ross was right. And some listeners will simply enjoy hearing Tupac's voice again. That final group should not be forgotten. For many fans, hearing Tupac is emotional. He died in 1996, but his music never stopped circulating. His voice continues to appear in documentaries, archival projects, compilations, remixes, interviews, and posthumous releases. For someone who grew up with his music, another unreleased verse can feel like opening a door into a time that no longer exists. That is why the debate cannot be reduced to business. There is emotion here. There is grief. There is nostalgia. There is identity. There is history. And there is money. All of those forces exist at the same time. That is what makes posthumous music so complicated. Now ask the question Ross is forcing everyone to ask. When does keeping a legend alive become refusing to let a legend rest? There is no universal answer. Some artists have estates that release enormous amounts of archived material. Some estates are extremely selective. Some fans want everything. Some fans want nothing. Some believe only finished projects should be released. Others believe every surviving recording should be preserved and made available eventually. Tupac's catalog sits directly in the middle of that debate. And because his voice remains so culturally powerful, every new release becomes a referendum on how we treat the past. That makes 50 Cent's involvement particularly interesting. 50 is not simply a random artist using an old sample. He is part of the same broader hip-hop lineage that Tupac helped shape. His career was built in an era influenced by the artists who came before him. Eminem is part of that lineage too. So the collaboration could be interpreted as a bridge between generations. Or it could be interpreted as a commercial attempt to manufacture an event. Which interpretation wins will depend almost entirely on the music and the way the release is handled. And that is something no headline can tell you. A headline can tell you that Rick Ross is angry. It can tell you that 50 Cent has announced a collaboration. It can tell you that Tupac's name is involved. But only the actual record can answer whether the artistic decision works. That is why the next stage of this story should be watched carefully. Not because some imaginary courtroom drama has been confirmed. Not because every rumor about secret meetings should be believed. Not because the rivalry automatically means something dangerous will happen. But because the culture is watching a genuine debate about legacy unfold through two of its most recognizable personalities. And that debate will not disappear when this feud does. It will come back every time another legendary artist's vault is opened. Every time a family approves an unreleased verse. Every time a label discovers another recording. Every time a producer builds a new song around a voice from another era. Eventually, the industry will need a clearer cultural standard. Legal permission may answer whether something can be released. It does not automatically answer whether it should be released. That is the distinction at the heart of everything. Ross is speaking to this should. 50's project, if released, will be judged partly on the can. And Tupac's legacy sits between those two words. Should and can. Permission and respect. Business and memory. That is the real battle. And it is much more interesting than another round of insults. Because the old 50 versus Ross feud has already given us years of spectacle. What it has not given us before is a debate this directly connected to the preservation of a dead artist's voice. That is why this moment feels bigger. The rivalry is familiar. The subject is not. Now there is another layer. Courtney Kemp. Ross's decision to bring her into the conversation shows how quickly this rivalry can move from one subject to another. Power became one of the most important television projects associated with 50 Cent. Courtney Kemp created the series, and 50 became closely associated with the franchise both as an actor and executive producer. Ross's argument is that the creator deserves recognition and loyalty. That may be his opinion, but it also serves a strategic purpose. It attacks the idea that 50's success is entirely self-created. Again, that is a familiar tactic in celebrity feuds. Reduce the opponent's independence. Point toward the people who help them. Suggest that the public image leaves out important collaborators. The opponent then has to defend not just the current controversy, but their entire history. That is how one insult becomes a full narrative war. And it is exactly why 50 may choose not to respond point by point. Because if he answers every accusation, he accepts Ross's framing. If he changes the subject, he controls the conversation. If he ignores the criticism and releases music, the music becomes the answer. That may be the smartest move. Sometimes the most powerful response to a rapper is not another insult. It is a result. If the song is great, the argument changes. If the song is weak, Ross's criticism gets stronger. If the song is controversial but commercially huge, both sides will claim victory. If the song never arrives, the controversy may become part of the mythology surrounding it. Every possible outcome creates content. And that is why this story is so difficult to kill. Even silence can become a headline. Now think about 50's history with Eminem. The two artists are connected by one of the most important partnerships of 2000s hip-hop. Eminem helped bring 50 into the shady/aftermath orbit, and their association became part of the story of 50's rise. So when Ross questions why 50 remains loyal to Eminem, he is touching a relationship that has been public for decades. The irony is that Eminem has already been connected to Tupac's posthumous catalog. That makes the current combination less random than it might appear to a casual observer. Still, history does not automatically make a new release artistically correct. The audience will decide, and audiences have become extremely sensitive to posthumous releases. They notice production choices. They notice whether vocals have been edited. They notice whether a verse sounds complete. They notice whether an artist's voice has been manipulated. They notice when a release feels like a genuine tribute versus a marketing exercise. That means the people behind the project have very little room for error. If 50 wants to make this work, the smartest strategy is not to turn Tupac into a prop in the feud. It is to let the music stand on its own. Because the moment the song becomes primarily a weapon against Rick Ross, the cultural argument gets weaker. Tupac deserves to be the center of his own music. Ross may have used the controversy to attack 50. 50 may use the controversy to promote the project. But the actual recording should not become secondary to their rivalry. That is the line fans are watching. And perhaps that is why Ross's comments landed so strongly. He forced the conversation away from, will 50 and Eminem make a big song? And toward, should Tupac be part of it? Those are completely different questions. One is commercial, the other is cultural. And cultural questions are much harder to answer. Now let's talk about the most exaggerated claims circulating around stories like this. Whenever a major celebrity controversy breaks, social media quickly fills in the blanks. Someone claims there was a secret legal filing. Someone claims a studio panicked. Someone claims security teams changed plans. Someone claims a contract was leaked. Someone claims an executive called another executive. The story becomes more cinematic with every repost. But unless those documents, calls, or filings can be independently verified, they remain claims. That does not mean they are definitely false. It means we do not know. And "we do not know" is an important sentence in entertainment journalism. It protects the audience from turning fiction into fact. It also makes the story more credible when something real eventually happens. So if a verified legal filing appears, that will matter. If the Tupac estate publicly confirms the collaboration, that will matter. If 50 releases the track, that will matter. If Ross responds with another public statement, that will matter. Those are developments worth following. But invented details do not need to be added to make the story interesting. The real story is already loaded. 50 Cent, Rick Ross, Eminem, Tupac, Courtney Kemp, a rivalry stretching back nearly 20 years. A debate about posthumous music, a question about loyalty, a question about legacy, and a potential collaboration that could put 3 generations of rap history into one record. That is enough. Now here is the question I think fans should really debate. If Tupac's estate has authorized the use of his vocals, should fans still have the right to criticize the decision? Absolutely. Legal permission does not remove artistic criticism. At the same time, criticism does not automatically prove exploitation. Both things can be true. The estate can authorize a release. Fans can dislike it. The song can be legally released. Fans can argue that it should not have been. 50 can genuinely respect Tupac. Ross can genuinely believe Tupac should be left alone. There does not have to be one cartoon villain. That is where this story becomes more mature than the average rap feud. The easy version is 50 versus Ross. The deeper version is everyone versus the question of what happens to a legacy after the artist is gone. And that question is coming for every major catalog. The music industry is built around ownership, but culture is built around memory. Those two systems overlap, but they are not identical. A record label can own rights. An estate